As I always say, the reviews on horror films that I see from these different sources like Rotten Tomatoes, Metacritic, Internet Movie Database, all that stuff, the numbers usually don't surprise me when it comes to anything of this genre: horror, suspense, thriller, the psychological, all that stuff. So, this movie was produced and distributed by Lionsgate, directed by Rennie Harlin. Budget of just under $9 million. Right now, the box office is just over 40 million. So, about 4.5 times its budget so far. The movie just came out a month ago, and I would suspect that this movie's probably going to be in theaters for another 2 weeks, maybe maybe three. But movies like this aren't in theaters for that long, especially nowadays. Usually, those type of movies are in theaters for, some of them are lucky if they even last a month. After their car breaks down in an eerie small town, a young couple is forced to spend the night in a remote cabin. Panic ensures as they are terrorized by three masked strangers who strike with no mercy and seemingly no motive. Now, keep in mind, I think that motive is going to be revealed in the second or third part, because this is chapter 1, and they said chapter 2 is supposed to be released near the end of this year. I'm guessing around November or probably even December, and part 3 will be released next year. So that's why they put seemingly in it, because, well, right now there seems to be no motive, but anybody who follows this type of stuff, I mean, it's pretty much a given. I'm sure there will be a motive given. We just don't know what it is. Now, Rotten Tomatoes gave this movie a 22%. Not a surprise. Rotten Tomatoes is a tough one. And so is Metacritic, but they were a little bit nicer about it. They gave it a 43. Internet Movie Database gave it a 47. Google users were a little bit nicer. They gave it 54. Now, let's jump to Common Sense Media and see how they break it down. 5 parents and 4 kids gave their reviews. Common Sense Media gave this a 40%. Okay, no surprise there. Wow. They gave it a 40%. The parents on there gave it an 80%. Out of the review of 4 kids, they gave it a 100%. Well, the kids are being nicer than everybody else on this one. How do they break it down with story? Now, I'm sorry, right quick. Let me do the cast right quick. There's not that many of them, obviously. You have Ryan, played by Froy Gutierrez. You have Maya, played by Madelaine Petsch. Debbie, played by Rachel Shenton. Jasmine, played by Ella Brucker-Larry. Emma Horvath playing Shelley, and some other people. Some of these were like background and side characters, but Ryan and Maya were the main ones. In The Strangers, Chapter 1, Maya and Ryan are taking a road trip to celebrate their 5th anniversary. They stop for lunch in the small town of Venus, Oregon. But when they get back to their car, it won't start. A local mechanic informs them that he has to send out for a part. A server at the cafe, Shelley, drives them to an Airbnb where they can spend the night. At first, it seems like a romantic evening, but trouble starts when a creepy figure knocks at the door and asks for someone who isn't there. Then Ryan has to head back to town to find his inhaler, and Maya begins seeing strange masked figures everywhere. When one of them attacks her, the couple realize that they're in for the fight of their lives. Now, is it good? You know what? I need to start pulling up let me pull up ChatGPT on the side right there, just for the questions. The third entry in a not very good series that began in 2008 in the first movie in a new trilogy. This home invasion horror movie makes no improvements and adds nothing new to the formula. Now, I will say this. That part, I can't agree or disagree with that just yet. I know I saw the first Strangers, to those of you who don't know, but I'm sure most of the horror fans already know this. So the original Strangers movie came out in 2008, starring Liv Tyler. And then they had a sequel 10 years later, The Strangers. I think it was called Pray at Night or Pray at Home, whatever that was called, 2018. I don't think I saw that one. Both of them are on Max, which I'm going to watch soon, and then I'll kind of compare and see how I feel about the 2008 one versus this one. So I don't know. I'd have to go back to watch that one. The Strangers Chapter 1 is the first film in a trilogy that director Rennie Harlin shot all at once. Perhaps the future installments will expand on the story, I'm sure they will. It'd be hard for me to believe that there would be three movies that tie together and nothing's really explained. I mean, what's the point? But this time around, it's pretty scant. Harlan, best known for his action movies, does have Nightmare on Elm Street and Exorcist entries on his resume, and this film looks professional, but it's lifeless. That's their opinion. It makes all the same mistakes as its predecessors, such as having the stranger seemingly possess the ability to appear and disappear suddenly and noiselessly, which that happens in other horror/slasher films. The killers, who are definitely creepy in their mask and in the casual way they move, are otherwise totally uninteresting. They have no dimension, no flaws. And as ever, the heroes aren't terribly smart, although they may be a teensy bit more resilient than in the earlier movies. Characters are forever tripping over things or forgetting their phones. In one scene, Ryan returns from town and stomps and creaks all over the house looking for Maya without ever calling her name. We're meant to think he's one of the strangers. Maya unwisely takes a shower. While he's gone, has she seen no horror movies? Okay, now, that's a good point. And the strangers use an axe to bash a door in when they have already shown that they could just magically appear inside. There are dumb jump scares aplenty too. I wouldn't call them dumb. I think some of them, the one jump scare I remember was a little bit legitimate. Weirdly, the whole thing starts with an opening crawl about the frequency of violent crimes in the U.S., then makes no further comment. Ultimately, this movie seems like a little more than a placeholder, a vacant attempt to wring more money out of a fizzled franchise. Now, let me go back to one of those. It said, Ryan returns from town and stomps and creaks all over the house looking for Maya without ever calling her name. And it says next to it in parentheses, we're meant to think he's one of the strangers. Well, you know what? I think that, spoiler alert, cut the video off right now if you don't want to hear the spoiler. But once they were captured and tied up and held hostage in chairs in the cabin, you had three masked strangers that appeared there, and guess what? One of them had fatally stabbed Ryan. So that clearly disproves the theory of him being one of the strangers. Now, here's the part that got a little more interesting for me. One of them had stabbed Maya. She got knocked out. She was knocked unconscious. She woke up. She was in the hospital bed. And as she got out the bed, one of the strangers was laying in bed next to her, and she apparently didn't see him. And he was wearing the mask. And then it cuts to end credits. So I would say the majority of the movie was pretty interesting and kind of kept me on edge. There were some parts to the movie that kind of appeared to be slower and a little bit more boring. Overall, I think I can give this movie I feel I can give this movie a 7.5 out of 10. I think it deserves just about that. And that ending really makes me curious to know what's going to happen in the next film. So I didn't see the first two films in theaters. And I'm like, you know what? I have to go back and watch them on Max. And if they're good, of course, those are actually kind of irrelevant because the chapter 2 ties in with this one. I think I'm willing to see the second one in theaters whenever they release it. So I don't know that we have a release date yet. At least I haven't seen one. But I think that's what 7.5 out of 10, I think, feels good for this type of movie, right? I think that's about right for this. Families can talk about the violence in this movie. Why do you think the movie opens with the crawl about the frequency of violent crimes in the U.S.? What do you think the movie's trying to say about violence? Is the movie scary? Yeah, I think a good deal of it was scary. I mean, when you're in a cabin by yourself, or at least with one other person, and then somebody comes knocking and asking for someone who isn't there, and they're just standing there and just giving each other a 10-second stare. There's something a little bit scary about that, and it's obvious that person is one of the bad guys hiding something. Why do people sometimes enjoy being scared? Again, I've gone over this before. The adrenaline rush, the attention-grabbing effects, all that stuff. What is the appeal of the home invasion horror subgenre? Let's see what ChatGPT has to say about that. I don't really know the answer to that. So So here's how they answer that question. The appeal of the home invasion horror subgenre can be attributed to several psychological and emotional factors. One, violation of safety, breach of sanctuary. The home is typically seen as a safe haven, a place of security and comfort. The idea of this sanctuary being violated taps into a primal fear, creating intense psychological discomfort. Personal space. The intrusion into one's personal space by an unknown malevolent force amplifies feelings of vulnerability and helplessness. 2. Realism and relatability. Believable threat. Unlike supernatural or fantastical horror elements, home invasions are a real-world threat that many people can relate to, making the fear more immediate, and intense. Everyday setting. The familiar, everyday setting of a home makes the horror feel closer to reality, enhancing the viewer's immersion and emotional response. 3. How many of them is it? There's 8 of them. I'll shorten some of these. 3. Psychological tension. High stakes. Cat and mouse dynamics. 4. Empathy and identification. Identification with victims. Empathy. 5. Moral and ethical exploration. Moral dilemmas. Character development. 6. Survival instinct. Fight or flight. Resourcefulness and ingenuity. 7. Social and cultural commentary. Class and power dynamics, paranoia and trust. And 8. Emotional catharsis, release of tension, satisfaction. These elements combine to make the home invasion subgenre particularly compelling and terrifying, and it plays on the deep-seated fears and psychological triggers that resonate with a broad audience. That is why for the most part, that's why I like the horror film genre, whether it be slasher, like Scream, Halloween, Jason, Freddy, or if it's psychological thriller / psychological suspense, like Insidious, for example. That's the best horror film franchise that I've seen outside of slashers. If you can find me one better, let me know. How are alcohol and pot represented? Is substance use glamorized? No, I don't see that. Are there consequences? Why does that matter? How does this movie compare with its predecessors? Does it try anything new? I would have to watch the predecessors in order to have a better opinionated answer on that. But like I said, 7.5 out of 10. And hey, a $9 million budget to a $40 million box office, that ratio, I think it's just right for a movie like this. I mean, again, it's horror. It's already on the low end of the spectrum. So if you miss it in theaters, this is Lionsgate. So I'm assuming it's going to be on either Max or Peacock. And right now we're in June. This movie came out in May, so it's going to be on streaming by August or September. So give it, 3-4 months. Give it about that. So May, June, July, August. I would say for sure by September it'll be on streaming. But if you like this type of stuff, I say go to the theater. I think it's worth seeing it on the big screen. So I don't know how much money this is going to gross by the end of its theatrical run. I would say maybe, honestly, I don't even know if it's going to get past 45 million. The movie's been in theater. It's been in theaters for a month. And this is Sunday night. I went to go see it on Friday night. When I left the theater Friday night, its box office was like at 39 million. 2 days later, it's just over 40 million. So I think it's starting to slow up. Maybe some people have jacked the movie and watched it at home. So I don't think it's going to get past 45 million. But either way, it made about 4.5 times its budget. So a small gain is still better than any loss. So I got more movies coming. Like and subscribe and go to the movies to go see it if you want to have the big screen experience and, all that good stuff. So go check it out and you let me know what you think.